apparently the school took it away. So now we'll start. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. All right. On the second one, very quickly, Professor Hajda will now deal with the issue of Crimean Tatar relations in the present and in the future. And Mr. Nadim is here. Yes. And Hüseyin Oylupinar, Dr. Oylupinar is here. Dr. Hajda is here. Lubko, do your best.
Thank you. What are the instructions in terms of logistics?
Logistics, we're looking at if you can do this session in 60 minutes.
50 minutes.
60.
50.
No, it
Oh, okay. If you can do it in 50, you're wonderful, but I'm giving you a maximum of 60. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Like,
Just give me hand signals.
I will be a lot.
But are we more or less on schedule?
Was it?
Are we more or less on schedule, or do we have to?
Are beginning to, you gave us a lot, you gave us some time earlier, and now we're getting back to normal. You give us 50 to 60 minutes, we'll be fine for the show, okay?
Well, thank you for those of you who have stayed for the second session, and we will be getting closer to the events of today and actually taking some glimpses into what the future may or may not hold. We will continue again with very brief introductions because you can look at the bios in your program. Our first speaker continues the Polish connection, Nadim Hüseyinov, who also has many other professional and institutional connections about which you can read. He will be speaking, let me see, Putin's War and the Aftermath. Is that your presentation? Is that your topic?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. And Hüseyin I will introduce when his turn comes. So with no more ado, please.
Yeah.
Nadim Bey.
I'll use this post to extend my gratitude to organizers, to everyone who came here for this exceptional opportunity. I'm really glad, even though my flight was extremely long, longer than planned. I am still really happy that I made it here today, and I can share my thoughts, my remarks on Crimean Tatars and Crimean Tatar-Ukrainian relations that may sound to us today, as we are in this modern or today panel, obvious, intuitional, but it requires some analysis. It requires some, I think, careful examination how and why Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians were today struggling today and fighting today against Russian oppression, against Russian aggression. So my presentation is titled Trauma, Identity, and Recovery, and I will take you through these three stages. First, traumas that shape both peoples, both nations. Then the convergence of the identities of Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars, obviously under the pressure of empire, and finally the possibilities for recovery through institutions after this empire. As this was announced by the moderator at the beginning, that we are entitled to also look into future in this panel. So if we go to the second slide, here are the three questions that I tried to ask and seek answers during my presentation. Namely, how did the 2014 annexation of Crimea reshape the relationship between Crimean Tatars and the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainians? In what ways did the 2022 full-scale invasion accelerate the convergence of identities? And finally, what models of post-imperial recovery can be drawn from this case for, comparative studies of empire and decolonization? Together, these questions, they form an arc of my talk, trauma identity recovery. Let's go to the third slide. So to understand the present, we must begin with the past, with two foundational traumas. Yeah, we see on these pictures on the left is the Holodomor trauma. That is the case that had been engineered by Stalin, the famine in 1932-33. And the picture on the right presents the deportation. There are no photographs, there are no pictures that survived deportation. This is the drawing, the picture that is authored by Crimean Tatar well-known artist Rustem Eminov. It presents the deportation itself. These events, they were not just historical events, obviously, right? They became identity-defining traumas. And for decades, they developed in parallel. The Ukrainian trauma and memory about Holodomor and the Crimean Tatar memory about the deportation, they were developing in parallel without or with little overlap. But since 2014, and even more after 2022, these memories began to resonate together. And I'm going to try to show and demonstrate how it happened. They formed a shared narrative of resistance to Russian imperialism. The traumas, of course, gave both people a deep awareness of life under empire, but it was annexation in 2014, annexation of Crimea, that transformed parallel histories into a shared present. And if we go to slide 4, that features annexation as a starting point. My point here is that annexation was the starting point, not the full-scale invasion in 2022. That has become a decisive turning point. For Crimean Tatars, it meant immediate repression. Measures banned, activists disappeared or jailed, language rights stripped away, and other examples. They are all known. For Ukrainians, it was a rupture, right? It's territorial laws, hybrid war in Donbass, as it is officially called, when we refer to that period of time, a shock of sovereignty, right, that is endangered. Both became victims of imperial violence, both people, though in different ways. And in this moment, Crimean Tatars emerged not as a marginal minority, but as a loyal partners in sovereignty to the Ukrainian state. Because, and we also have to say that, before 2014, the relations between the Ukrainian state and Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars were very difficult. They were mostly marked by lack of knowledge, mutual knowledge, lack of interest. 2014, annexation has changed it. In 2022, full-scale invasion, since the annexation has become a turning point or the starting point of this process of converging identities and coming the two people and their narratives and their ideas together, closer together, the 2022 was the accelerated. It accelerated it, and it will be featured on the slide, on the next slide. On my next slide, presenting the picture obviously presents the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion, which did not create the solidarity, and I'm underlining this again. It accelerated it because the Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian identities started to come together closer and to mutual understanding of each other based on the same or similar trauma they experienced, started in 2014. Millions of Ukrainians, of course, were displaced from Mariupol, Kherson, Bucha, other towns, right, and cities And their exile mirrored what Crimean Tatars had endured since 2014. This was another point which demonstrated to Ukrainians, the Ukrainian nation, closer what Crimean Tatars and helped them understand better what they felt back in 2014. And a decade-long process of integration that was taking place or was happening since early 90s, when Crimean Tatars managed to return to Crimea, repatriate to Crimea, was compressed into a few years since 2014. When the concept of other is clear in the eyes of both groups, and this other has become Russia as an aggressor, it kind of sharpened the in-group boundaries, and it the process of coming together and closer with these experiences and with the plans for the future of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians was faster accelerated. So, like I said, 2022 wasn't the beginning, but an important accelerating that intensified the convergence of identities under this shared trauma of Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. However, the convergence, of course, didn't mean identical strategies. We're going to slide 6. Each group resisted in the ways history and circumstances allowed them, right? The Crimean Tatars, for Crimean Tatars, it was first of all civic activism, cultural, nonviolent protests, diaspora advocacy, preservation of language, faith. For Ukrainians as a state and as a majority of the Ukrainian nation, it was, of course, mobilization, right? It's territorial defense, national armed struggle. It doesn't mean that Crimean Tatars didn't join Ukrainian armed forces. They created battalions, they joined the army, but we are now speaking about different people's experiences as masses, right? As groups, as national groups, to better understand their perspectives and how the processes that led them to come even closer together and today being the point where they planned together the fight was possible. So the strategies were distinct, but very complementary, as we see. They formed a multi-layered resistance to empire, I think. And this brings us to a bigger question. If resistance unites them in practice, how is Ukraine itself redefined its role post-2022, especially, and the broader story of empire and decolonization? And I hope you uncover this on the next slide, 7. Ukraine, Russia's project in Crimea, first of all, is best described as a colonialism or settler colonialism, I think, which is a rising identity, imposing empire, suppressing institutions, which is the case, of course, for Crimea. And against this, today, Ukraine has reframed itself. And we have seen this in all those media clippings and the discussion, the public discussion, media going on in the public sphere or space, where the decolonization discussions has emerged in Ukraine, within Ukraine. So Ukraine defined or identified itself and positions itself since then as a decolonizing actor, a state that once overlooked Crimean Tatars before 2014, not because it didn't like Crimean Tatars, but because it didn't consider them an important player, an important partner. It considered them as citizens, a minority group that is powerless. And then 2014 helped Ukrainian state to rediscover or redefine Crimean Tatars as an important actor, as a player that can be a partner in this decolonization narratives, clashes, or difficult and hard work to convince the West, the other part or the rest of the world, that Ukraine has the right to use this terminology and to position itself as a decolonizing actor. So the political rhetoric such as Crimea is Ukraine, right? And there are many other similar, I would say, ideas such as this one that have emerged since 2014 and especially 2022, places Crimean Tatar and Crimean Tatars and Crimea at the very core of sovereignty, of Ukraine's sovereignty, which made Ukraine struggle more than a war of defense today. It is a colonial struggle. That is important to also mention each time we discuss Ukraine's war effort. But it is fought and partnerships in partnership with its indigenous groups or peoples, such as Crimean Tatars, especially Crimean Tatars as the most active one. Now, we understand that the colonization cannot stop at just recognition, right? That Crimean Tatars received from the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian state, or slogans that we have discussed in the previous slide. For recovery to last, to be sustainable, it has to be anchored in institutions. Institutions are very important. Crimean Tatars, maybe better than others, understand that they have struggled since the collapse of the USSR to reestablish their institutions, their representative bodies, which are still operating in mainland Ukraine, in Kyiv and other cities that are Majlis, Kurultai, and other institutions. Next slide, please. Like I said, yeah, trauma and identity alone are not enough to sustain future. They must be transformed into laws, policies, and institutions, and they have been, because Ukraine started to, for example, Ukraine legally recognized Crimean Tatars' deportation as an act of genocide. It has made certain steps towards recognition, Majlis, Kurultai, national representation institutions or representative institutions as part of the Ukraine's legal framework. This work hasn't been finished yet, but it's extremely important. It has also started and is running now a cultural revival programs supporting Ukraine's language. And this all leads us to the shared governments in a reintegrated Crimea, because there is a promise that in whichever form it will take place, will it be Crimean Autonomous Republic or Crimean Tatars, under the Crimean Tatars, like or control, administrative control, obviously as part of Ukraine, so sovereign Ukraine. The name isn't important. What is it? 0? I don't have time. I run out because 5 minutes. I need, yeah, 3 minutes. Sorry. And these points lead us to the larger model, how Ukraine and Crimean Tatars together can create a, I call it co-produced framework of recovery after empire. In other words, after the occupation of Crimea by Russia. My last two slides, slides number 9. Yeah, it's about exactly, it's about this institutional recovery, which must be, I mean, recovery must be institutional to be durable, to be lasting. And this model of institutional recovery grows out of shared trauma and convergent identities that we have discussed in the previous slides, turning wounds into a foundation for inclusivity, where Crimean Tatars feel the ownership of their state, Ukraine, not just Crimea. And I believe that only then recovery move from symbolic to durable. So let's conclude by trying to gather to the threads of trauma, identity and recovery. There's 3 points that I anchored or focused my presentation around. Again, 2014 annexation was the start of identity convergence. 2022 invasion of Ukraine, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, accelerated this process through shared trauma of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians. Then memories that once were developing in parallel now resonate together and collaborate to form a joint narrative outside of Ukraine. And finally, recovery requires co-produced institutions, not just solidarity. Or to put it simply, trauma created the wounds, both on Ukraine's and Crimean Tatars side of history. Identity built the bridge, and recovery points the way forward in a way that I have discussed and that I believe is efficient. Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians aren't on the resisting empire. They are shaping what recovery after empire can look like. And these are true words. I truly believe that Ukraine as a state, Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars as its nations or people, have the capacity to reach this goal of decolonization of the Russian imperial rule in Ukraine and Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see already that we have a lot to discuss, and I'll try to keep as much time open for discussion as possible. The second speaker at this session, even though I urge you to read in greater detail, I have to mention, especially as someone with whom I've had a close relationship. He came to Harvard from Turkey to Harvard University Ukrainian Summer Institute, where we first got to know each other. He continued with his Ukrainian history studies in Edmonton, where he received his PhD, and then came back to Harvard as a research fellow at the Ukrainian Institute, and then another year at Harvard's Middle East Center in a special program that we were trying to develop on Ukrainian-Turkish Crimean Tatar relations, which unfortunately ran against some real issues, including the shutdown of the university for over 2 years and certain other administrative issues. So that was not able to be brought to fruition as we had hoped. But I'm anxious to hear what he may have to say since we last cooperated. So it's my pleasure to introduce Hüseyin Oylupinar.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope this works. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I am grateful to the organizers. It is always very complicated to organize such events, so it takes a lot of effort, thinking, and lots of hands that come together to get this event happening. So all of you who have taken part in this organization, I'm grateful. It is a privilege to be part of this event. I'm very happy that I have this opportunity to talk. I find myself relevant on different fronts. A long time I am in Ukrainian studies. I have family ties, so I'm related to Ukraine. A long time I'm into Crimean Tatar studies. I'm related that front. Also, part of my family has Circassian roots, so I have that part in my identity as well. So it is always very interesting to see and feel in these different fronts how things are evolving besides my academic interests. There were very interesting presentations and ideas today. And I was feeling like, I would take either one of them and go forward for hours-long discussion. I wish I could do that, but mandate limits it. So some of the issues I wanted to address has been addressed already. Maybe I will take a different emphasis on some of the issues. Maybe I will be overlapping a bit on the way, but I want to start by emphasizing that we are speaking at a time in which history has ceased to be a background. It is not a passive knowledge, but it is a battlefield. We have to discuss about past, and we have legitimate grounds to go back and find about what happened in the past. Often so, the empire comes with not physical and cultural destruction, but it destroys the narrative of the past in a way which works best for it. So talking about recovery, I will come to the recovery later, but we have to recover the history, what really happened in the past, what really happened to the enslaved and destroyed peoples. We have to know about them. And this is where we start discussing what is the task for the future. So I want to argue one simple point, and I think I will finish with that line, is that Ukraine's recovery cannot bypass Crimea. Crimea's recovery cannot bypass Ukraine. Paths forward are intertwined, and because pasts were intertwined, as some of the speakers mentioned. It is so because Russia's aggression targets all as a relationship, not as isolated communities. Today, I will try to do three things, hopefully, if the time allows. Straightening the present war inside long perspective of Russian imperial policy. Second, to show how Crimean Tatar-Ukrainian agency has already shaped responses. And third, offer three practical common roads for recovery and integrate security, justice, and culture. When we talk about war, we in relation to Russia, whoever fought with Russians, we have a pattern. We see a continuity. So war is a continuity. And when we say Putin's war, we must also name its genealogy. It is Russia's war, and there is an obsession with territorial expansion, which comes with suppression and assimilation of populations that is centuries old. And we also are to understand why that part of world's geography is broiling with aggression, why over and over again Russia comes with violence. So let's go back to 1775, 1783. The Catherine, the so-called Great, liquidated the Ukrainian Cossacks, erasing Cossack polity that anchored Ukrainian society. Hortitsia as a symbol survived, but the political home did not. In 1783, the Crimean Khanate, a regional power for centuries, was annexed. And similarly, its memory remained, but people were subjugated. These moves from the Russian Empire lacked the Black Sea step into imperial space. And we can, as some presentations also mentioned, the violence that continued. So there is a continuation of war and suppression coming from the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union and later Russian Federation. The Sovietization of Ukraine in a similar way. And then Holodomor. Then comes the Sürgün, the deportation of Crimean Tatars in 1944. Where thousands died in transit and exile. All of these were designed to empty the land of its people. Consider Holodomor and deportation, Crimean Tatar deportation. It is about keeping the territory, but the population was not wanted. Population as such, as it is, with its cultural connotations, with the identity involved, was not liked, was not the preference. The preference was that that content would be removed. That identity should go. If that identity doesn't go, then we have to get rid of the physicality of the human beings, that is ethnic cleansing and genocide pursuits. So the trauma left by the imperial suppressions and destructions of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, and I follow this through into Russian Federation, is intergenerational. It lives inside families' timeless timelines, families' timelines today. And since 2014, annexation, the repressions in Crimea, after the 2014 occupation of Crimea, the Russian-installed court banned the Crimean Tatar Mejlis. They were called extremists, terrorists, and basically the representative body of indigenous people, the Crimean Tatars, was dismantled. International institutions such as European Parliament, Human Rights Watch, and the US Senate Department condemned the ban. International Court of Justice ordered Russia in 2017 to lift the decision. Russia did not comply. These matters because it shows the same imperial reflex we have been seeing, dismantling the local indigenous agency to rule the land. Then the full-scale war, the invasion, and we have heard and seen independent reporting, and international bodies have documented systematic torture in detention sites, forced passportizations, and deportation of Ukrainian children for so-called re-education and adoption, which are actions the International Criminal Court has tied directly to top Russian officials. Again, the logic is continuous historically: seize the territory, reshape or remove the population. Looking back, if you put 1775, 1783, 1944, Holodomor, 2014, 2022 on one line, the pattern is clear. Imperial possession with destruction, physical, be it physical, and also comes with cultural extinction. That is why recovery must be decolonial in design. It should not merely be a post-conflict recovery. As was mentioned again, there is a history of common struggles and common agency, and we have listened to the presentations referring to Konotop and many other cases from history. These are all reminders of Tatar-Ukrainian coordination is not improvised. It is historical in a sense. It demonstrated how coalitions changed the battlefield and struggle geometry. The present coalition, Ukrainian, Crimean Tatars, Circassians, partners from other captive nations, stands in that tradition. And also as a basis of the common struggles and common agency, the Mejlis and the civic infrastructure is important. The Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people remains the community's legitimate representative body, even if it forced to work in exile. Its banning is precisely because it organizes agency for the community. It is activism, education, commemoration, diaspora linkages, and recovery must be also re-empower the Mejlis and interlock it with Ukrainian state institutions. And we have to also refresh our memory with, because time is passing by fast and many things are happening. Crimean Tatars, when it was first occupied, they were bringing food to the isolated Ukrainian soldiers who were encircled by the Russian army. When Ukrainian churches were suppressed and closed, Crimean Tatars offered mosques for the Ukrainian Christians to organize them as their places of prayer. And then in many cases, behind the scenes, I know that Crimean Tatar leadership has been in defending the Ukraine's right to exist. Particularly in the case of Turkey, they have been very, very open and straightforward with the Turkish government at times when Turkish government appeared to be trying to get close to Russia. and that turned into a quarrel, a serious level of quarrel between the Crimean Tatar leadership and the Turkish government. And also, I know very well from the leadership of the Crimean Tatars that Crimean Tatars had the pity because they didn't have the means, they didn't have the access to the power institutions in Crimea. Mustafa Cemilov was telling me that if we had some policemen of Crimean Tatars, we could take the guns and defend the country, defend the peninsula. We could do things that would change how things evolved. And even so, we have to remember that under Ukrainian control, Crimean Tatars were not receiving support to have access to power institutions. They were kept away from them. And the propaganda was that Crimean Tatars look for integration with Turkey. If we support them, Russians will be disturbed. So we should not bring it up. So Russians would be happy. Ethnic Russians in Crimea would be really happy. To please them, we keep Crimean Tatars away from the power institutions. And eventually, this didn't pay back. So there are mistakes from the Ukrainian governments. Historically, we have to see these mistakes and failures also, not to repeat, not to allow them to happen again, if possible. Back to the common efforts and the common struggle. So Ukraine and the Crimean Tatar networks have become the memory spine of this war, recording disappearances, torture, sham prosecutions, and health-threatening detentions. UN missions and NGOs confirm patterns of abuse, and this documentation is the seabed of justice. Again, fighting for indigenous rights and political vision is important. Ukraine adopted the law on indigenous peoples of Ukraine, recognizing Crimean Tatars, Karaites, and Krimchaks, and granting collective cultural and self-governance rights. Implementing this framework fully and visibly is the affirmative alternative to the occupiers' policy of cultural erasure and political silencing. Again, the diaspora is important. Diaspora mobilization from the UN and NATO fora has amplified Crimea back onto European and North American agendas. Recent debates about not trading away Crimea in any future deal have been shaped by Crimean Tatar voices as well as Ukrainian diaspora voices. This external pressure changes negotiation baselines. Again, the genocidal tracks, which happened historically and are important for the common basis of struggle forward and recovery. Basically, I will not go into the discussion of it, but two groups have been and still being destroyed in parallel, side by side. Indicators of genocide is in place, serious bodily and mental harm, one of the indicators of genocide happening. Crimean Tatars are targeted with fabricated terrorism charges, torture, and decades-long sentences. Ukrainians are imprisoned, beaten, and silenced for expressing national identity. Again, another indicator of genocide, destructive living conditions. Crimean Tatars are stripped of representative institutions and religious freedoms, while Ukrainians see their schools, churches, and civic associations eradicated. Both communities live under conditions designed to erase their future as distinct peoples. Again, another indicator is killings and disappearances. Activists and leaders from both groups have been disappeared or killed, not in mass numbers, but enough to show intent to terrorize and weaken the groups in part. Again, looking back onto the imperial logic, it is the same. Russia wants the land, but not the people who embody it. Crimean Tatars are cast as suspect alien minority, Ukrainians as an illegitimate national identity. In practice, both are subjected to genocidal erasure at the same time and in the same place. And again, this dual assault on them is one of the bases why their recovery must be envisioned together. One community cannot be safe if the other remains as a target. Some suggestions to common roads to recovery. One is justice and memory integration. One of the ways goes through centering Crimea in transitional justice, ensure any spatial tribunal or hybrid mechanism integrates Crimea-specific crimes, including banning of Mejlis, enforced disappearances, and coerced conscription, alongside Bucha and Mariupol-type atrocities. Protecting the witnesses is another way to go, scaling up medical, legal, and relocation support for released detainees and families of the disappeared, align with the reporting systems in international organizations and US-EU human rights sanctions designations. Another way to go is, or a parallel way to go, is Crimea Truth Project, a joint Crimean Tatar documentation and public history initiative that connects the deportation of Crimean Tatars of 44 to present-day abuses, presenting a continuous narrative of colonial practice and survivor agency. The second road to go is attaching security sovereignty as a shared design. Assuming that Crimea is central and not peripheral reality is important. In air maritime defense planning, as NATO adapts to drone incursions and GPS jamming spilling into Allied airspace, Ukraine's capacity to interdict and around Crimea is part of European air defense, not just Ukrainian sovereignty. Sanctions and negotiations are important, conditioning any sanctions relief discussions with Russians on measurable reversals in Crimea. For example, lifting the Mejlis ban, releasing political prisoners with international monitoring, and ending forced conscription should be brought to the table. In the longer horizon, demilitarization benchmarks for reintegration is important. Any plans for demining, port security around the peninsula, civilian control over energy communications infrastructure with indigenous participation in oversight bodies. So security becomes co-produced, not imposed on Crimean Tatars and Crimea. The third road to go is the cultural, education, and institutional measures. This is one of the ways is to funding indigenous institutions, restoring, enhancing the budgets for Mejlis-linked cultural, educational programs in exile, plus Crimea-focused Ukrainian curricula that teach Crimean Tatar-Ukrainian relations. Scholar rescuing and returning them back to the system is important. Expanding fellowships for Crimean Tatar educators, journalists, and lawyers, prioritizing their return to the homeland. Again, forging twin cities and museums is another way to go with Crimean communities to co-creating exhibits on the deportations and the repressions that ensued later. And there is one suggestion I would make for future is the heritage corridor, a cultural route linking sites from Hortitsia to Crimean Tatar heritage as an infrastructure for belonging after reintegration. I will stop. I have no time left, but I will summarize the end this way, that again, the recovery of Ukraine cannot bypass Crimea, and Crimea's recovery cannot bypass Ukraine. Security and recovery cannot be assured if all captive nations freed. This is the way to go, and first step is stopping aggression, victory in the battlefield. And if that doesn't come, then the recovery cannot be assured or can be only temporary. So defeat of Russia is the starting moment of recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this is the most interesting aspect of our meeting today, and that is its focus on the present and future. It allows us to look both at empirical data, at existing realities, but also to speculate a little bit and to prepare ourselves for what may be coming or what we may need to be prepared for. We got some excellent, I think, material for that kind of discussion. I would like to add maybe a couple of more points. One is that we should always be prepared for changing circumstances. We've focused a great deal on history, but history, of course, is not always the sole indicator of what may be happening. A couple of just recent developments since the war, are very sobering reminders. And one is the unexpected developments in weaponry. During the initial invasion in 2022, no one, I think, imagined that Ukraine would show the kind of strength it did, and especially in its development of technology producing drones for which Russia, at least at that time, was not prepared. And the idea of Ukraine basically destroying the Black Sea Fleet with drones, I think, would not have occurred to most people there. We should be prepared for changes in political leadership. I mean, the fact that we've had different presidential administrations in the United States is one example. We don't know what may be happening in the Kremlin. Things like that. Many historical developments have taken a very different turn because there was a change at the very top. Just one example, 1762 in the Russian Empire, when the Russian Empire was in a conflict with Prussia, with the growing German Empire. But the death of the Empress Elizabeth and the coming of her nephew, who was Germanophile, totally changed the dynamic of international relations in Europe and the diplomatic revolution that had occurred. So these things have to be taken into account. Even geopolitics taking place in what one would think would be remote areas, and one would not in the past have thought of them in connection with Crimea and Ukraine and Russia, should give us pause. For example, relations between China and Taiwan. We at one time would never have connected what was happening in Eastern Europe with what would be happening or possibly happening in East Asia. The not unexpected, but as yet unknown factor that is for me the most fascinating is demographic change. Sometimes we tend to think of populations as being stable and that they will continue in the same kind of algorithm as we've become used to. Let me give you an example of how quickly things can change, because I think there's a sobering lesson there for the Crimean Tatars. The Kazakhs. The Kazakhs had suffered proportionately, even more than the Ukrainians, during the famines of the 1930s. Probably the Ukrainian population lost about 25%. The Kazakhs lost about 35%. This was followed by Khrushchev's Virgin Lands campaign in the 1950s and the immigration of millions of Russians and Ukrainians to plow up the steppe and sow corn and wheat. The Soviet census of 1959 showed the Kazakh population had declined to 29%, which put it below the limit that the Stalinist Constitution of 1936 placed on having a formal status of a union republic. The Constitution had said that you had to have at least a majority. A lot of commentators, I was becoming interested in these ethnic issues in the 1960s, and I was especially interested when the next census occurred, and then the following censuses. And a lot of specialists, very smart people. We're talking about, we can just forget about the Kazakhs. They are gone. The Russians were a majority. Next were Ukrainians, who were, for all practical purposes in Kazakhstan, younger brothers supporting. They were certainly not on the Kazakh side of the equation. And then the Kazakhs. The last census in Kazakhstan shows the Kazakhs at 72%, the Russians down from over half to 14%. Absolutely amazing, turnaround in a very, very brief period of time. Now, Crimea, thanks to the deportations of 1944, was totally depopulated of the Tatars. And as we know, even when the other deported nationalities in 1956 were rehabilitated, as theoretically were the Crimean Tatars, but the others were allowed to return to their homelands, the Tatars were not, and only started in large numbers coming at the end of the 1980s. By the census, the last census, unfortunately, conducted in Ukraine in 2001, they were 12.5%. Ukrainians were about 26%. The Russians actually had fallen to approximately 53% of the population of Crimea. When one reads American newspapers or even analyses by people who should know better, Crimea is treated as a primarily Russian territory. By 2001, it was not. Ukrainians were increasing because of it was as part of the Ukrainian Republic, Ukrainian state. There were constant changes, influxes, and the Tatars because of their natural rate of reproduction. Jump forward to 2014, that's another, 13 years. By my calculations, very unscientific, but based on good intuition, I think the Crimean Tatars were probably 16 or 17% of the population of Crimea. But that is only part of the story. If you take into account the rates of reproduction of any population, what is important not only changes in the total numbers and percentages, but in correlation of those changes with the age structure. The older the population, the less reproduction, the less representation it has at the younger age. And the converse for those who have large families and are growing. Again, my kind of, I cannot give you a precise formula, but my belief is that at the time of the occupation in 2014, the Tatars constituted between 20 and maybe 22% of the population 15 years old or younger. The Russians, we know historically, and we know also from what has been happening since, in Russia itself and in Crimea especially, is a very old population. This is where the retired generals from the army went to spend their last years in luxury and the warmth of the weather and the climate. Young Russians having large numbers of children were not there in large numbers. So this has been upset, of course, by the annexation, by the war, out-migration of Tatars, some in-migration of Russians. But we have to pay attention to what is going on demographically, and is not perhaps Crimea on a similar path as was Kazakhstan after 1959. Remember, from 29% to 72%. These are things that Mr. Putin cannot really control. Even Stalin could not control birth rates. And, it is something to keep an eye on. So we have processes going on, some of them military, some of them social. There are technological changes, a lot of things that can affect the future. And I'll open the floor now to your comments and questions. Walter.
I would say exactly 5 minutes for that session, because otherwise we will be doing it.
I'm sorry, can we have a mic?
We have 5 minutes.
Sorry?
I'm saying
5 minutes.
Two session.
Okay.
Because the bottom line is we will not think. And
Right.
this is
Okay.
one of the most fascinating panels that we've heard, but one good question of somebody, and please, 5 minutes.
Well, we'll keep you in anticipation to the next conference in that case. So who is the lucky person who gets to ask the one question or make the one comment? Well, I guess it's Walter.
I'm going to say only one question, a very short one, and I'm blowing up my own regime here. And that is, there is a sense that throughout the country, and I sense it amongst the Crimean Tatars, about the atesh. Can someone just very, very shortly, within a minute or two, explain to us, because I think that's an important phenomena as well. Not only were you talking about the formalization of security forces at some point in the future for the Crimean Tatars, but this is a really interesting and important development. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about that, or I think everybody else would as well.
Yeah, I'll start then, Hüseyin will follow. Yeah, well, ateş translated to English as fire, as an informal group of activists who emerged on a scene of the ongoing war a few years ago. I don't know if after the full-scale invasion, they simply started with undertaking some operations or actions that undermined Russian military operations in Ukraine and Crimea, collecting information about the Russian military forces, military equipment in Crimea, sharing this information through their social media channels, most probably also with Ukrainian intelligence. So making Russians' life and the war effort against Ukraine more difficult. In general, in a nutshell, if I am to explain, I unfortunately don't know their current status. What are they doing? I know that they appear from time to time on the media, on social media, sharing again some insights, some information that can be useful, and I'm sure is useful to the Ukrainian intelligence. But how big the group is, what is their current status? I'm not following this currently, so maybe Hüseyin can add something to this.
Thank you. Yes, we don't have, I think, field work about them, so we don't have interviews with them. We don't know how they are getting organized, but I will go back a little bit. If there is any argument that the Crimean Tatar contribution to defense of Ukraine or fighting for independence is insignificant or it's not there, I would say this, that from the start of Donbas occupations, Crimean Tatars are fighting in the field. I interviewed them. I met these Crimean Tatars, and interestingly, I met them in a place near Chongar, where they were basically fighting over in Donbas, coming back to take a rest, refresh, and go back to fighting. And they were using one house there, falling apart, but it was a standing house. where I met them, they were using the house together with the Pravi sector members. And one of them was there. I asked him, how do you get along? What do you think about each other? And he says, when I look at this Crimean Tatar, I don't see him less patriotic than me. I have seen him, how he's fighting in the front, how he's giving his all and ready to die for Ukraine. We don't have any problems between us. There was basically Crimean Tatars were silent or kept behind. Again, from the Crimean Tatar leadership, from direct interviews with Mustafa Cemilev, I know that he couldn't speak or own these groups publicly because he was fearing that under the occupation, Crimean Tatars would receive punishment for their involvement in Donbass. So this could heavily turn back on Crimean Tatars and destroy their lives further on or faster. So we don't know that involvement of Crimean Tatars in Donbass fighting. Yeah, I had direct interviews with these Crimean Tatars heroically fighting. Well, deserves respect indeed.
Thank you.
And Atesh, I apologize, I didn't come back to Atesh. We don't have time, but there was this activism and the culture of fighting against Russia on the both sides, on the Ukrainian side and Crimean Tatar side, understood each other along the time of fighting, seeing that on both sides there is a dedication for fighting. So Atesh is a continuation of that spirit, as I understand and see it.
Which I think brings us to the end right on schedule. Again, let me thank my panel, as well as those from the first. And I hope we provided you with food for thought for the future. And do we have a break now? Anyway, I turn things over to you, Walter.
I'm deciding that do a break. We need to have you back in 3 minutes, 5 minutes, so that we can actually get the entire third of the panel. And we have special guests as well that's added. So I would ask you to come back in 3 minutes. Okay. I'm very sorry that the University did not let us have a wonderful suite that would the concept of the body interest of that.
Nice speech, Hüseyin. Thank you very much. A couple of years ago we met, but we couldn't. I couldn't communicate with you. With Walter, there was an organization. I forgot which exactly.
Thank you.
But it was 2-3 years. I guess at least 3 years ago. It was in New York, near the Central Park. There was a place. Anyways, so yeah, we show. And I have your card somewhere, but I never.
What is your Circassian?
My father's side. So my great grandmother was Circassian Adel. She arrived and my husband. Which is,
You remember the name of the family?
well, no, not in recourse because she was already gone from this life until they started to give second names. She only the recourse appears as a Muslim, but I will send you the link.
You have my contact.
But I will, just in case, I would be very happy to write down again. And I would be very happy to, communicate and do. Okay. So I will be always ready to contribute any efforts. I had a small contribution to one of the institutions, Kafet in Turkey. They have been working on pushing the genocide recognition agenda, but they had internal changes. The administration changed. I think more than me about how these things work.
But it happens to be the most pro-Russian.
Now, that administration was not. that particular it's so they wanted to work with me to prepare some documents that we would be able to we would be able to provide strong historical arguments in favor of the proof of genocide in international circles.
Actually, it was Catholic, the leadership of, remind me. Who sent a letter to the Georgian parliament to withdraw the recognition of the.
I was told back then, the person who was contacting me was not the leadership. He was one of the members of the administration. He was telling me about they've been having struggles. I didn't go into this because I better as an academic stay out of internal dynamics, but I understood that there's that sort of line also entering the association. Yes, I was definitely a long time I left based in Turkey. I only go for a visit and being back out of the country. I'm based in Canada now. Travel, working. But
Nice to speak to you. Thank you.
Ben de konuşmaya geldim size.
Memnun oldum.
Nasılsınız?
İsminiz?
Hakan.
Orada gördüm ben. Bilgisi Hakan. Çok memnun oldum.
Nasılsınız?
Siz yeni mi geldiniz?
Burada yaşıyor.
Burada yaşıyorsunuz.
Burada
Geçelim.
dernek başkanlığı yaptım. Evet.
But there are people who you know this. Verbetsky, unfortunately, got a background. My idea
I did everything with me.
What is it, on getting information, right? And you know, and what you maybe any information about the crime, you know, like long, it's like the bodies and structure, what is it like? Translation, annotation.
I would
Just jot that down for the moment, and then we can be in touch with them, maybe more information. And I think I know who I will go to with this. Another way to go about it, the information that's now that there have been money donated precisely for these purposes, and they can't be used for anything else. So someone might say, okay, let's do this because we have the money. Look, let's be in touch. I'll try to get. Maybe you could send me a song.
Yeah, of course. Maybe on the set.
Yeah, and I'm in a car. I still use the good cars, but when I write to you, you can, you will have my return address. Actually, I could invite you.
I have to do a loss. Apartment. The two young ladies from,
They're both, I think they're both Crimean. I think there is a sister. So I am. So even when I retired, I still use. Okay. Well, I'm glad somebody's doing this sort of thing. We had in the previous leadership, this was not.
That's part of one.
Communicate with clients.
All right, let's reassemble. Ladies, you have to sit in front. We will roll this forward. After the green, and then we're into a section to I will ask you.
If you change the translation, so I know it's like I'm very, yes, sir.
So what we're gonna do is. So. That's right. I'm not gonna push it into then. First one. Adel. If Ron goes elsewhere from the girl. Zed.
I was trying to find that
Marcus, yeah. Marcus here.
And then you can say it's 1550.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
And by the way, my son is a major business partner of this coast. Yeah, right. That's what he is. That was a big, very happy to work here. By the way. So, yeah. It was,
All right, Mark, are you ready?
I have seen.
I was working on this before I started. Okay, that's yours.
Yes.
Oh, no, that's yours. No, I haven't swapped myself. Okay, thank you.
Oh, it's SPSS.
I was just giving that,
I thought it was SPSS.
I will ask,
What's a good historian during this program?
Roman, can you possibly get out there and one last call? Because we really do have to settle down and sit down. I also, as that's happening, I'm going to explain what we'll do at the next session because you obviously have all understood that there is now a lingering or a upcoming time restraint that we're dealing with. I will give it an extra couple of minutes, but in the next session, there are going to be one or two changes. First, that's okay. That's Miller, just, yeah. In the third session, the taking measure of the trials of the Circassian nation and more broadly examining Russia's genocidal colonial policies, Dr. Thomas is going to be the chair. We are going to have Adel, if you can, Bashqawi, Captain Bashqawi. And we will also have Mr. Victor Rude. I think we have a problem with the connection with Mr. Brian Williams, so we will also at some point ask, ladies, no, yeah, yes, he's going to be the first speaker, yes. And we will call the thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to have, in the place of Brian, the order will be the captain, then Zera and Zarema, then Pan Victor, and we will have a special guest who I did not realize was going to join us, but is a very important guest for us, and he'll probably get an introduction from his old professor or his old mentor, Professor Hajda, and that's Pan Hennady Poberezhny, and he will actually be talking to that issue of the broad genocidal policy question. Okay, so we'll do it that way. I will give it until we've heard from Ed that we can give this session up until about 5:40, 5:50, and we will probably then finish up with the last session for about 10 minutes with both Ayla and Paul and Andrei. So that's what our game plan is upcoming, okay? This way we can stay and everybody can say their word. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, Mark, it's all yours.
Ready to go?
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. I thought I had the easiest question in the room today, which is, what is genocide? But as I started looking at the definition, I went back to what Lemkin actually defined as genocide. When he started coining the term in 1943, and let me read you his definition because it goes to whether what's going on we refer to as a genocidal war kind of meets that definition. I'm by no means an expert in what's going on in Ukraine, Crimea, etc. But let's look at what Lemkin said. His definition, and I'm a big fan of Harry Potter, words matter. Disintegration. So genocide is the disintegration of political and social institutions, of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and economic existence of a national group. Pretty broad reaching, by all counts, very broad reaching. However, when it went to the convention for finalizing, the major powers said, we don't like it. And they changed it, and they took out some key wording. One, they took out anything referenced to political, which provides a really, if you're a genocide fan, somebody who likes to commit genocide, it's good because you can say, it's not genocide, we're trying to wipe out political groups. On the bad side, we get to a point of what we call in political science, conceptual stretching. I'll give you an example of conceptual stretching in a little second when I go over the fact that since 1945, there have been 89 genocides with 55 million victims. And I'll give you 30 million are by the Chinese, which don't look like genocide for the most part, depending how I break it out. Okay, also excluded from Lemkin's original definition was gender violence, which included forced marriage, forced divorce, and forced pregnancy. The other thing that he took out, and this hits very close to home, is forced migration. Doesn't fall in the category of genocide. Having served in Bosnia, I kind of struggle with that definition, with the fact that it's not in there. And as an American, we did the American Indians or the Native Americans, I kind of struggled with that. But let me throw you some more interesting stuff about this, which is the current definition, and I'm not a lawyer, I say it Holiday Inn Express, but I'm going to pretend to be one today. For genocide to stick in the ICC under the Rome Treaty, here's what we say, and it comes right out of the Geneva Convention. You have intent, and the intent is, vice what Lemkin said was disintegration. It's to destroy in whole or in part. Now, in whole sounds pretty clear, but that's the Holocaust. It's a Holodomor, or in part. Well, there's a case involving a Serb general from the Bosnian War who killed 8,000 Bosnian Muslims. And his argument to get out of prison was 8,000 isn't very many people. That doesn't count in part. So there's a legal question about what does in part mean. The other part, the rest of this is a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Now keep in mind, political's out. Now that's the intent. You have to intend to destroy them, not to disintegrate them. Lemkin's definition is far broader. And the 5 categories are killing members of one of those groups, causing, this is a nice broad one, a good one for a good prosecutor. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group, a good catch-all, a good old legal catch-all. The other category, deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, and here we go, in whole or in part. And the final one, there's two related to kids. Imposing measures intended to prevent the birth within one group. And then the fifth one, which our friend Putin and Bela Lubova did, which is taking children from one location and making them part of another, which is a great charge. I mean, they got those two right on the money with that one. However, with all that legal definition, we have to figure out what is actually genocide. So I'll leave it to our speakers to go through, and I'm sure Dr. Rood over here is like, Dr. Thomas ain't a lawyer, why is he talking this stuff? But I want to throw in some other parts about this. As we have gotten more advanced in how we understand how people and how cultures live, other people have come up and said, well, the environment in which a group of people live matters. Now, the environment can be stretched too for legal terms. It could be the geographical environment, or it could be the spiritual environment, etc. That's not in the definition right now that stands in a Rome Treaty, or for that matter, in the Geneva Conventions. We're sticking very much by the letter of the law. And today I'm going to be an originalist as we talk about what does genocide look like here. And you can feel free to shoot me apart. You can be the jury and say, we need to change it. But just keep in mind, we have extremes. Let me tell you that when I've gone through the 89 genocides that have occurred since 1945, 30 million are by the Chinese under political regimes, 1 million are by the North Koreans on North Koreans. So what happens when we do that? It creates a broad zone of what counts as a genocide, so it means nothing. Now, the good news about all these things that are occurring, genocide is the highest, most notorious, most heinous crime a state can do in another state. Below that, in terms of badness, is crimes against humanity. All the things that we think should be included in genocide fall under crimes of humanity. So things like extermination, which isn't genocide, that's just not giving people food or medicine so that they can survive. Everything under there in terms of gender crimes is under crimes against humanity. Let me see what else is under there. Torture, sexual slavery, enforced prosecution, enforced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, persecution, apartheid, all fall under that. And by the way, so is enforced transfer or relocation of peoples. Falls as a crime, under a crime of humanity, not as a genocide, what we think would be genocide. Now we know the intent of relocation is genocide, or at least to clear the land of people that we don't want. But by the Rome Treaty, it doesn't fit there. All right, so I'm not going to speak any more about this. We can ask questions, but let's turn to our speakers who are far more informed about the geographical area we're talking about and the cultural groups we're talking about. So with no ado, Dr.
Okay. Hey. And the first one is not available. Ladies and gentlemen,
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be invited to this blessed event, and I'm looking forward to have a brief glance at important points of my lecture, which is going to be or the written part of it will be published on internet this evening. So I would like to go on, may this gathering open the door to deeper cooperation between Circassians, Crimean Tatars, and Ukrainians, bound by memory, resistance, and justice. We have Circassia in 1856 that shows here in the map, which was a country on the Black Sea. This is the map of independent Circassia. It's in German language, was displayed in the military museum in Vienna, Austria, and it is written in German, as I said. Next map is about the Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula. And this is a map for the whole area. In this map, on the northwestern part of the Caucasus, you can see the three main Circassian cities, Maikop, Cherkessk, and Nalchik. The Crimea, this map was displayed in 2014 after the Russians occupied the Crimea. The Circassian genocide, most devastating genocide of the 19th century. Russia concealed crimes in Russia and Circassia and beyond, a legacy of brutality and silence. The Circassian genocide, the forgotten tragedy of the first modern genocide. 21 May is the day of remembrance of the victims of the Circassian genocide. Most devastating genocide of the 19th century, the genocide committed against the Circassian nation by Tsarist Russia in the 1800s was the biggest genocide of the 19th century. Yet it has been almost entirely forgotten by later history, while everyone knows the later Jewish Holocaust and many have heard about the Armenian genocide. Circassians leaving their village, and this is another one, the mountaineers leaving the All. This one is by P.N. Grozensky in 1872. Destruction of Shapsog and Abzakh villages along the Dagoy River, March 1835. A legacy of brutality and silence, the basis of Russia's chronic failure and moral commitment to resolving the Circassian question is its involvement in hypocrisy of benefits exchange with other conspirators. For normalizing genocide and its repercussions, Vladimir Putin chose to conduct the 2014 Olympiad in Sochi, a site of the 1864 genocide of the Circassian people. The fall of Circassia was displayed and published in many European journals at the time in 1864. And this map shows the routes of deportation of Circassians from the Circassian coast to Anatolia, and some of them were taken directly to the conspiratorial powers. The Treaty of Koshuk-Kanarja allowed the Tatars of the Crimea as politically independent, that permitted the Russian Empire to annex the Crimea in 1783, which brought Russian evil to the Black Sea coast. And this is the aftermath of the Koshuk-Kanarja treaty, and shows what has been the conspiracy about it. In 1829, Treaty of Adrianople, Russians and Ottomans exchanged shame and disgrace interests intended for the acquisition of peoples and nations' homelands in the Caucasus between a crumbling empire and a grasping one. Amid the ongoing Russo-Circassian War, the Ottoman Empire engaged in a cynical seeding of regional interests along the Black Sea coast between Anapa and Poti to the Russian Empire. The Circassian coast extended between Anapa and Adler, but knowing that Circassia was never part of the Ottoman Empire. And this is the map of the Treaty of Adrianople. Circassian resistance leader Tugojoko Kazbek, notorious Lion of Circassia, created in 1850 by James Stanislaus Bell. An 1840 illustration shows Circassians attacking a Russian military fort, which was built over a Shapsogian village. Circassian Navy during Russian Caucasian War, as Russians call it, ships were made by the Circassians themselves. Before genocide had a name, Circassians were subjected to genocide before the word existed by Raphael Lemkin in 1944. Stages of encirclement, invasion, siege, occupation, and isolation of Circassia. Russia's imperial rise from Mongol rule to brutal empire, Bashqawi expanded through conquest, genocide as a tool of imperial ambition. This is a Mongol invasion of Ryazan, as it shows. Bashqawi expanded through conquest, expanding borders, the Tsardom of Muscovy in the 15th century. Russia always tried to falsify the Circassian history and even delete sometimes. Pattern of violence, dozens of nations targeted, genocide, deportation, and cultural erasure, a legacy of racism and imperial greed. Circassia's losses by May 21, 1864. Out of the 4 million Circassians, 2 million Circassians were exterminated, 90% deported to the Ottoman Empire, diaspora in more than 30 countries of the world now, 10% displaced internally within their original homeland. Parade by Russian troops symbolizing the end of the Caucasian War at a military encampment in Qabada, which is the Circassian name of Sochi, 21 May 1864. May 21, 1864, another military parade in Krasnaya Polyana on the occasion of the end of the Russian Circassian War. 90% deported to the Ottoman Empire, and it shows in this map they were taken to Anatolia, Balkans, and from there they were taken to other parts of the Ottoman Empire at the time. a group portrait of 8 Circassian men in uniform with another man, possibly an Ottoman official. 10% of Circassians displaced internally, map of the Caucasus where Circassians live, the green area, approximate image of Circassians' presence before and after the Russian-Circassian War, published in Let Our Fame Be Great by Oliver Bolo. This is published in Oliver Bolo's book, shows Circassians in the green before 1864, and where the Circassians in the green in the second map have ended. Monument of Maikop, Adige, mourning of the Circassian genocide. Sculpture Tree of Life, sculpture in memory of Adigs or Circassians killed in Nalchik. Demands for justice. In September 2014, a Circassian civil rights activist, the head of the Kabardino-Balkarian Republic's Human Rights Center, Valery Khatajukov, accused Moscow of treating Kabardino-Balkaria like a colony. The Circassian nation calls for genocide recognition, right of return, restoration of legitimate rights, and self-determination. Walt Richmond, quote, as being published in Circassia Born to be Free book, the tragic years of Russian-Circassian War, criminal military practices aimed at destroying all elements of a nation. Language and cultural survival, plus 7 million Circassians in diaspora, preserving language and identity, cultural resilience across generations. A quote from the Circassian Miracle Book: if the language is lost, God forbid, it endangers the survival of the Circassian nation. Preserving language and identity. The Circassian language was divided in 1939 by Russians into 2 imposed Cyrillic 56 characters alphabets called Adiga and Kabardian. These dialects have been categorized behind Russian language according to a recent constitutional amendments. In the absence of a Circassian intellectual opinion on the choice of an alphabet that would unify the language, the original Circassian alphabet was ignored and even abandoned. This is the Circassian original alphabet, which looks like Armenian and Georgian. Russia has ever since fiddled with the indigenous ancient Circassians or Adiga language, regardless being a pillar of national identity. Evil deeds led to the danger of language extinction. That's linguistic genocide, has been called by some people, according to the UNESCO Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger. Cultural resilience across generations. Russia has falsified the history of its criminal acts. It manipulated and fiddled with historical heritage, archaeology, facts of the Circassian nation and the Caucasus region. The cultural components, such as values, customs, traditions, and beliefs, have been manipulated. Preference is given to the Russian language, even through Circassia. Circassian is one of the oldest languages in the Northwest Caucasus. Only 800,000 people are living still in their original homeland. Exhibition of archaeological items, bronze and stone items found in Kabardino-Balkaria. Mycop 5720 to 5020 years ago, Caucasus region Bronze Age culture related to Copper Age. Bronze Age mountain kings, the Mycop culture 3700 to 3000 BC. The Mycop lost Bronze Age culture of the exotic Caucasus region. Northwestern Caucasus dolmen culture, that's called dolmen Koleho, 3 to 2 millennium BC. Kaleho or Kaleho village in Agoj Shapsog, Tuapse region, presently Krasnodar area. Sandstone transferred to Moscow State Historical Museum. Dolmen near the Jana River or Jana Valley, near the Circassian port city of Gelendzhik, northwest Caucasus, about 3000 BC. Zychia was the predecessor of Circassia and a medieval kingdom on the northeastern shore of the Black Sea, inhabited by Circassians. Circassian attire, weaving memorial into light. Circassian fashion is more than attire. It is a living testament to ancestral memory woven from centuries of resilience, and so coveted was its dignity that Russian and mercenary invaders sought to claim it, with even Emperor Nicholas II donning its form, unaware that its soul couldn't be stolen. And this is the head of the Russian fascist regime at the time. The Circassian national custom, parliaments of two Circassian republics, Kabardino-Balkarian Republic and the Republic of Adygea, passed resolutions on recognition of the genocide against Circassians in the course of Russian-Circassian War in the 19th century. The State Duma avoided acknowledging the genocide, and signed by 20 activists, Circassian organizations asked European Parliament to recognize the Circassian genocide in October 11, 2006. Nalchik activists hold events on Circassian Day of Mourning. Georgian Parliament recognizes Circassian genocide of ethnic Circassians May 20, 2011. Circassian Genocide Memorial Monument, Anaklia, Georgia, inaugurated on May 20, 2012. Engraved on white marble in 5 languages, to the freedom-loving Circassian people, multi-ethnic Georgian people, honor the memory of victims of the genocide committed by the Russian Empire against Circassian or Adiga people in 18th and 19th centuries. Ukraine, January 9, 2025. Ukraine recognized the Circassian genocide that was in the 19th century. Ukrainian members of parliament showing Circassian references in parliament. Legal responsibility. Russia is the successor of the empire and the Soviet Union, obligated under international law. Circassians are entitled to recognition, apology, compensation, the right of return to homeland, self-determination, and independence. Russophobia. Russophobia, Russians are not happy about it, but it's not irrational, born of trauma. Response to countries of brutality. Russia or Russia's own policies reinforce global mistrust. Echoes of Putin's extremism. And these three pictures show Circassians sympathizing with Ukraine and Crimean Tatars in both Washington, D.C. and New York. Empire collapse. Empires collapse not from weakness, but from arrogance and comfort. Russian colonists. Circassia, first forgotten victim. Largest genocide of the 19th century. Continued aggression to this day. Historical trauma sustained. The question remains, what gave them the right to invade and commit all types of hostilities against the Circassian nation? Moral vs. legal boundaries. Legal non-retroactivity may shield perpetrators, but it cannot shield history from memory, nor justice from invocation. This is not just a call for recognition, it's a call for remembrance, justice, and dignity. Final quote, we speak not only to indict, but to remember. And to remembering and in remembering, we resist the erasure that law alone cannot remedy. Thank you.
Victor, I guess. Okay.
I'll start. Dear colleagues and participants, it's a great honor for us to be here today at this significant event. On behalf of the Crimean Tatar Foundation USA, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to the Center of US, Ukrainian Relations and Williams Paterson University for organizing really this is important event. We extend special appreciation to Walter Zaritsky for inviting us to participate in this meaningful event. What makes this analysis particularly relevant for understanding contemporary geopolitics is the methodology that we can extract from the Crimean Tatar experience. Here we have a rare opportunity to trace the complete cycle of colonial destruction, from the destruction of great statehood to attempts at complete erasure of a nation from the world map. This method, as we can see, are being applied in full measure today in Ukraine. Since 2014, Crimea has been occupied by Russia. Did this stop Putin from further escalation and full-scale invasion? Absolutely not. The reason is simple. Crimea is not the Kremlin ultimate goal. They aspire to much more. Crimea represents an extremely valuable, symbolic, economic, strategic, and military asset for Russian policy, but it's merely a stepping stone to what they truly want. Their goal is to return Ukraine to Moscow's sphere of influence entirely. The prohibition of activities in Crimea of the highest representative body of Crimean Tatar, the Mejlis, is Russian classic preparatory stage of genocide. First, deprive the Crimean nation of official representative power and legal protection, then gain freedom from mass crimes against their defenseless people. Since 2014, thousands of crimes have been committed: murders, torture, imprisonment, shifts, and disappearance of Crimean Tatar activists, journalists, civilians. The absence of constitutional entrenchment of the Mejlis in Ukrainian legislation deprives the indigenous nation of collective protection and return each member of the group into an individual target without institutional shield in Crimea. Russia's historical methodology demonstrates a repeating pattern. Crimea was illegally occupied 3 times. First time by the Russian Empire in 1783. The second time, the sovereign state of the Crimean Nation Republic was illegally occupied by the US, by the Soviet Union in 1918. And finally, the third time, Ukraine's sovereign integrity was violated through Russia's illegal occupation in 2014. We should remind that only thanks to the massive support of Crimean Tatars in the 1991 referendum did Crimea join Ukraine. According to data from Chervona and Guboglo, if it weren't for the Crimean Tatar votes, Crimea wouldn't have remained part of Russia. Crimean Tatar trusted their lives and freedom to Ukraine, choosing a democratic future and believing Ukraine would protect them. It was they who supported the Orange Revolution in Crimea. It was they who went into resistance in 2014 through organized resistance against Russian military forces. Their opposition proven crucial in preventing Russia from establishing legal justification for the claim that Crimean residents welcome Russian intervention. The analysis demonstrates that Crimean Tatars constitute the strongest political nation in Crimea for Ukraine. Russia is aware of this, which explains why Russia, historically, regimes have consistently committed genocide against this nation. The legal occupation of Crimea in 1783 left the nation without its own government, which doomed into immediate genocide in 1783, the drawing of more than 10,000 Crimean Tatars in the Black Sea. In 1918, the destruction of the Crimean Tatar Nation Republic led to the genocide at Krim of the 1921-23. Then we still need to uncover the next starvation of the 1932-33, which according to Travels was even worse in Crimea, followed by the murder of the entire intellectual elite in Crimea. It was in 1938. Before 1944, the absence of legal representation of Crimean Tatars in Crimea preceded the genocide Surgun, and in 2016, the prohibition of the Mejlis in Crimea became preparation for a new genocide. Ukrainian citizens still live in occupied Crimea who reject the illegal occupation. They are adapting under occupation. Many Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars remained on occupied territory not by choice. Some couldn't evacuate due to economic constraints, family circumstances, age, or health conditions. Others state to protect property or care for elderly relatives. These people live under constant pressure from the occupying regime. They are forced to obtain Russian passports to access basic services. Their children are compelled to study under Russian curricula. Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar symbols are banned. Regarding statistic of international human rights organizations, Crimean Tatars are especially vulnerable. Next. Statistical data based on documented facts from 11 years of illegal occupation of Crimea by the Russian Federation demonstrates evidence of targeted elimination of Crimean Tatars. Next. ФСБ, Росгвардия, ОМОN, ГБР, Ministry of Internal Affairs and militarized gangs, Русская община, systematically attack homes of Crimean Tatar families with children in the early morning hours. An act of complete lawlessness that violates international law and the Geneva Conventions, specifically the inviolability of the home, prohibition of arbitrary arrest, and the presumption of innocence. Without court decisions, without legal grounds, Crimean Tatar men are imprisoned for up to 20 years. Entrepreneurs are persecuted, forcibly mobilized and into Russian military formations, which qualifies as a war crime. Next. Religious persecution is characterized by brutal armed attack on Crimean mosques, systematic groundless arrest of Crimean Tatars facing sentences up to 20 years imprisoned, forced transport of prisoners of conscience to penal colonize thousands of miles from their families, flagrant violation of religious freedom through bans on prayer in detention facilities and denial of access to religious literature, denial of life-saving medical care to Crimean Tatars. Metropolitan Tikhon issues directives on forced conversion to Christianity of all Muslims, Crimean Tatar of Crimea. Occupiers continue to intensify the Russification and assimilation of Crimean Tatar children. There is ongoing systematic destroying of Crimean Tatar history and imposition of Russian imperial narrative in educational curricula. In areas of compact Crimean Tatar residents, they open schools and kindergarten with Russian language instruction. Schools prohibit their use of national symbols, sign of the attempt, and observance of May 18, the day of remembrance of the Crimean Tatar genocide. Next. Occupiers increasingly open cadet classes where students are prepared for admission to Russian military institutions, while children's camps conduct intensive propaganda indoctrination. Next. Systematic dissemination of information through Russian state social media platform has been documented, particularly through Telegram channels Smersh Sevastopol and Crimean Smersh, under the leadership of Alexander Talipov, state advisor to the head of the Crimean Occupation Administration. These platforms spread direct calls for genocide against Crimean Tatars. These calls include threats of physical extermination, forced expulsion of Crimean Tatars from their autonomous land, referencing a repetition of the 1944 Surgut genocide. These actions by officials of the Russian Federation qualify as direct incitement to genocide in accordance with Article 3C of the 1948 Convention and Article 25(3)(e) of the Rome Statute, as well as dissemination of ideas of racial superiority in accordance with Article 4 of the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. According to Crimean Tatar Foundation USA data, since 2014, there has been systematic removal of Crimean Tatar literature from public libraries in Crimea, which is part of large-scale cultural genocide. Under the guise of restoration, Russian occupiers are destroying the famous Hans Palace in Bakhchisarai, listed by UNESCO in 2003. At this time, there is a dismantling of memorial monuments to victims of the 1944 genocide, systematic destruction of historical mosques and Crimean Tatar cemeteries, removal of archaeological artifacts from Crimea to Russian museums. Okay, Ukraine officially owns Crimea according to all domestic laws, international law, and the international community. Numerous declaration, resolution, decision, and leading statements confirm this fact. We support the United Nations Declaration, which clearly states that Crimea is Ukrainian territory. This is the most compelling argument to give anyone who has any question. Therefore, the loss of Crimea, much less a conscious renunciation of ownership of Crimea as Ukrainian territory, calls into question a very important principle of the international security system that was established after World War II. This system, as you know, is now undergoing major trials. This principle of inviolability of borders. If this works now in Ukraine, then, you know, others around the world are already waiting. China regarding the Taiwan, someone will remember the Balkans, Africa, and others. Russia could obstruct our membership in strategic international institutions, including NATO and others. Even if there won't be NATO membership, but if some other security guarantee system is built for our country, we won't achieve co-equal status in this architecture because we couldn't defend our interests regarding occupied territories. They will provide assistance, but they will not treat us as sovereign equals in international politics. We will again be object rather than subject of international decision-making. Ukrainians' national interest requires full international recognition as an equal partner. Such subordinate status contradicts our legitimate aspiration. This argument demonstrates that the return of our occupied territories is critically important. That's all. And one more, a little bit. Crimea has been transformed into a military staging ground for strikes against Odessa and other Ukrainian territories. This threat will always loom. Russia's control over Crimea threatens not only Ukraine, but the entire security architecture of the Black Sea region, including NATO. If Russia's strategy succeeds, if we regain our eastern territories while Crimea remain under Russian, the Russians will work on these eastern territories from Crimea, so that after some time people will come out and say, we want this too, as this happened with Crimea. So we cannot give our territories, our Crimea to Russia. We have to think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, real quick comments. Thank you very much. They're very, very insightful. Oh, okay. Is he up?
Yeah. Mr. Root, I believe. I didn't realize it. And so if we can have Dr. Paterson be able to give this presentation.
Okay, that's fine.
And we'd be able to do that, and then we could have. And Jonathan, just so you one minute. But you didn't have him on time. This will round it out nicely.
The only reason I'm here, in contravention to what I said before about not giving introduction to the speakers, is that our speaker right now is not entered into your list of biographies, so that you do not have that information. I will just say a couple of words about him. Hüseyin Poberezhny, whom I know personally very well, with a very significant, though perhaps too little known contribution to scholarship of interest to Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, potentially Circassians, and in general to genocidal studies. He has a PhD from Rutgers University. I was fortunate and can attest to his performance. I was a member of his dissertation committee. His dissertation advisor was the eminent political scientist. I believe he was ranked 5th most important political scientist in the United States, Alexander Motel, who gave him very high marks. And Hüseyin also, I know very well from his several years, 3 years, I think it was, that he spent at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, where he initiated one of our more extraordinary projects, which will be of interest to, I think, everybody here, called the MAPA project, which MAPA is not a description of map, but it also is an acronym for its actual name. It's a digitalized map of certain aspects of Ukrainian history. And the first one, and the one that Hüseyin prepared, dealt with mapping the famine of 1932-33. An extraordinary difficult task because administrative units had changed between then and now, correlating data on demography currently and in the 1930s. It was very, very difficult. And it affects, I think, every aspect of Ukrainian studies. I don't think that you extended it at the time to Crimea, but it is definitely something that should be done. And perhaps it can also serve as a lesson and a model for Circassia and other victims of genocidal policies in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Hüseyin Poberezhny.
Thank you, Luca. Appreciate it. I have to preface my presentation by the fact that I partially will have to read from the prepared written remarks. I myself do not like presentation to be read. However, I'm going to be presenting not my concept, not going to be even presenting my interpretation of someone else's concept. I will be heavily relying on part of my presentation to the concept of Soviet genocide by Raphael Lemkin. Therefore, I will quote Lemkin. Therefore, I would like to be precise because it really matters to understand the concept and things which some of you might perceive controversial, because it actually does not square well with the official Ukrainian historical narrative of what constitutes genocide. So to those of you who do not familiar with that, that might sound new and controversial, but there is nothing
I'm going to say that you will not find in what Lemkin published in his famous, now not well known, but famous speech that's called the Soviet Genocide in the Ukraine of 1953. And then I will comment on this. I'll try to weave together the three cases, the Ukrainian case, the Circassian case, and the Crimean case. So bear with me for a few minutes, please. So Raphael Lemkin, the principal author of the concept of genocide, stated in his seminal book, Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, to which Dr. Thomas referred to when he was looking for a definition, that genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of protected groups, but rather a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of such groups, with the goal of their extermination and with planned objectives such as the disintegration of the political and social institutions, of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and the economic existence of the groups, along with the destruction of the personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of the individuals belonging to such groups. According to Lemkin, genocide is primarily about preventing the reproduction of protected, that is, national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups as such. That is, just for the fact of belonging to, of its members to the group as an entity. The way genocide is conducted is often opportunistic, and mass murder is not a crucial feature of its commission, but rather only a chance variation. Hence, it follows from the definition in the 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which Article 2, which was also cited to you, so I'm not going to go over it, that such a crime, in principle, can be committed without killing a single person. One of the convention's acts, the forcible transfer of children from a protected group to another group for their assimilation, does not anticipate killing at all, right? So people who use the number of murdered people as the measure just do not understand what constitutes genocide in principle. So it's not about how many people kill in order to measure whether genocide was committed or not. It's just, but what matters, I'm going to just explain to you. So under the convention, for the charge of genocide, 3 simultaneous conditions must be met. At least one of the 5 acts enumerated by the convention must be established. A protected group must be identified, and the intent to destroy the group as such must be proven. That's all you need. In his 1953 speech, Soviet Genocide in the Ukraine, commemorating the victims of the 1933 Great Famine, Lemkin condemned not only the brutality of this fundamental violation of the international humanitarian law, but also offered a perspective on Soviet genocide in Ukraine as a colonial crime, with the goal of the disappearance of Ukrainians as a separate national group and their forced assimilation into a single Russified Soviet nation. This destructive policy was aimed at the Ukrainian nation, a political community of diverse, though largely ethnic Ukrainian origins, not just a particular social class such as the peasantry or even the entire Ukrainian ethnicity. He explicitly stated that it was the classic example of Soviet genocide, its longest and broadest experiment in Russification, the destruction of the Ukrainian nation. So that's a destruction of the Ukrainian nation that is the classical case of genocide, not what you can often hear by the Ukrainians in Ukraine, that's Holodomor is the classical example. This is a perversion of what Lemkin actually did right, ascribing to him something he did not right. Okay, so Lemkin described the plan for this destruction as consisting of 4 prongs, of which most of you probably are aware. of a systematic strike aimed at certain prominent components of the nation. Despite the Ukrainian nation being too populous to be exterminated completely with any efficiency, its leadership is quite small and therefore easily eliminated through mass murder, deportation and forced labor, exile and starvation. Thus, the first prong was pointed at the intelligentsia, the leading intellectuals and professionals who formed and articulated the separateness of Ukrainian identity and the need for an independent state to protect it. As long as Ukraine retains its national unity and its people continue to seek independence, so long Ukraine poses a serious threat to the very heart of Sovietism. The second prong was directed against Ukrainian churches and their clergy, who were offered the opportunity to join the Russian church before their liquidation. So emphasis was not on their religion character, but on their Ukrainian character, from which a lot of intelligentsia actually came about. The third prong was directed at the independent farmers, the most productive, organized, conscious stratum of society, the repository of the tradition, folklore, and music, the national language and literature, the national spirit of Ukraine, to be completely exterminated through terrible starvation. However, Lemkin dismissed the high point of Soviet cruelty as just an economic policy connected with the collectivization, and instead insisted that peasantry was sacrificed to eliminate Ukrainian nationalism, to establish the horrifying uniformity of the Soviet state. It necessitated very specifically the destruction of the Ukrainian nation due to its location, size, history, and salience for Moscow. Notably to Lemkin, the nature of the Soviet genocide was not the complete annihilation of the Ukrainians as people, but the removal of their select parts that opposed the creation of the new Soviet man and the Soviet nation, the objective of the Soviet government for its entire rule in Ukraine. And yet, if the Soviet program succeeds completely, if the intelligentsia, the priests, and the peasants can be eliminated, Ukraine will be as dead as if every Ukrainian were killed, for it will be lost. That part of, for it will have lost that part of it, which has kept and developed its culture, its beliefs, its common ideas, which have guided it and given it a soul, which in short made it a nation rather than a mass of people. Again, I'm quoting Lemkin directly here. The fourth prong was explicitly colonial and consisted of the fragmentation of the Ukrainian people by the addition to the Ukraine of foreign peoples and by the dispersion of the Ukrainians abroad for ethnic unity to be destroyed and nationalities mixed. The foreign settlers, primarily Russian bureaucrats, soldiers, and professionals, especially educators, were enticed by higher wages, positions of authority, and prestige. They held leading and respectable roles in the colonial society ruled over by the Soviet imperial policy. That was only the logical successor to the long-term policy of liquidation of non-Russian people that had ample precedent in the operations of Imperial Russia. So it was Ukraine's lasting colonial subordination that made this policy possible, and it left it unprotected against the threat of the destruction of the pattern of the oppressed group. That is, indigenous foundations of its autonomous being and the imposition of the pattern of the oppressor. That is, alien rules of existence and consciousness. The essential feature of structural colonial dependency is that all the most important strategic decision-making directly affecting the population of a colonial state is made outside of its borders in an imperial metropole. These decisions are often made at the expense of a colony and contrary to its interest. Lemkin emphasized the colonial condition of power asymmetry between the dominant and the subordinate groups for the commission of genocide in those two concurrent phases, leading to the elimination of the cultural diversity of humankind, the deracination of protected groups whose way of life, beliefs, identity, and other aspects of culture were meant for eradication. It follows from Lemkin's concept that genocide in Ukraine cannot be reduced simply to the Holodomor as an aberration of the Soviet regime. While it was very important, it was only one component of a genocidal policy that went far and beyond famine, and whose victims were the country's entire population, not just those who were starved and perished. Equating genocide exclusively with the Holodomor is a manifestation of the common misunderstanding of the nature of the Sovietism, which was simultaneously totalitarian, colonial, and genocidal. Causes and consequences of the Soviet policy of genocide, as well as the denial of its policy and obstacles for overcoming its legacy. Lemkin's concept is the foundational and unmatched methodology for comprehensive and systematic analysis of the past and present of the Ukrainian society. So these are written remarks that I prepared, and I have a few minutes. I would like to expand and comment on other aspects of particularly colonial aspect of the genocidal policy. Okay. What I would like to emphasize is that Lemkin obviously is extremely important for the genocidal studies, for genocide studies. However, he is also incredibly important for the colonial studies as well, because the way he framed genocide as in those two phases of commission of genocide is that the asymmetry, power asymmetry, is incredibly important. So you have a rulers or the group that rules over the group that is subordinated and has all the potential to proceed with simultaneous destruction of that group and imposition of something else. So to what extent it destroys completely, annihilates the population, it depends. We know that the Nazi policies were different from policies by the Russians in Ukraine, the Circassian case and Crimean case. They're not the same. There are all kinds of differences. However, there are these common things is that there was a dominant group that was in position to do whatever it did to achieve its goals that were different. In every case, however, it led to the same goal, so objective. I want to emphasize that Lemkin was not working in vacuum, and I would like to mention just 4 names that are very important for you to remember, especially when he came to the United States. Clearly, his ideas about the Ukrainian case were formed in communication with such people as Roman Smolstotsky and also Lev Dobryansky. Very important, but also I would like to mention 2 Ukrainian Canadians. One is Ivan Lysak-Rudnitsky, and the other one is Roman Serbin, who was crucial in rediscovering Lemkin now a seminal speech that was never published until he actually managed to publish in 2008, to put it in circulation, that unfortunately did not make much mark on the way Ukrainian academia and politicians talk and think about the Soviet genocide in Ukraine, because Soviet genocide in Ukraine, it's not just 1932-33. If you just think about that, you don't understand what led to 1932, and you do not understand what happened after 1933. So the entire period of the Soviet rule was done in order to achieve this goal of creating new Soviet man and new Soviet nation, to which Ukraine was basically the biggest part to be sacrificed. So when we think about Lemkin and the colonial perspective, we have to think about structural asymmetry. What often is confusing to many people who do not really look into the political science and theories and concept behind it is that they confuse the structural asymmetry with things that interesting but conceptually irrelevant. They look for cultural proximity and they say, oh, Russians and Ukrainians are not that different, therefore that's not an issue for colonial domination. Yes, indeed, however, and the Ukrainians were not discriminated in Russia. They could and did achieve the highest position, like Brezhnev did, for example. However, there was a price to pay. They had to completely abandon everything that made them Ukrainian. And another thing is geographical distance. When you see overseas empires, that's clearly it is the case of imperial domination over colonies. However, this is not about how far or how different places that are dominated are. It's just what policies are instituted in order to achieve the desired outcome. So one thing I am running out of time, therefore I'm not going to go into other people's expertise having to do with Crimea or with Circassia, but I would like to tie them together. And the one thing I want to say, so yeah, the cases for genocide are somewhat different, but you also from hearing from Lemkin analysis of the Ukrainian case, you can recognize elements of that were deployed in Crimea, that were deployed in Circassia, and were deployed elsewhere. That's one important tying knot. There's another one, which Ukrainians are not willing to talk much at all, if they even realize that Ukrainians were often used as a ram against other people in order to subjugate that, to commit genocide, and later on become a victim of genocidal policies themselves. Look at the Circassian case. What happened in Kuban? Well, the Zaporozhian Cossacks that were destroyed and displaced by St. Petersburg regime were sent where? They were sent to areas that were populated by Circassian. They played a crucial role of displacing Circassian, of killing them off and establishing their own settlement there. Look at the coastal area of the Caucasus, so-called Black Sea host territories that were populated primarily by, the heirs of the Zaporozhian host. What did they do? Well, everything that you heard about destruction of the Shapsugis or Ubihis was done by the Ukrainians. And later, the Kuban host, largely Ukrainian, did the same to the rest of it. And now we, often using the axonyms describing the Adig population and calling them Circassians or calling them Kabardinians. Well, most external observers have no idea that actually referring to the same people that were dismembered and isolated from one another and pitted against each other. And when the Ukrainians were done with the Circassians, then the Russians did the same to the Ukrainians who came to replace them. So that is the pattern that happened again and again. It happened in Central Asia, it happened in Siberia, it happened in the Far East, and Ukrainians played their role, willing or unwilling, regardless. But that was the constant practice. So in concluding remarks, I just want to mention that we need to be really careful about what we consider to be genocide and not to take just a particularly heinous act that sort of a culmination of or a manifestation of a particular policy and look at this in continuum of what it took to accomplish particular goal. And therefore, the Holodomor is not genocide because it actually, I don't have time to go to convention and how it was adopted and how it was interpreted, but it does not explain everything that happened in Ukraine and why Ukraine, it is what it is today. Therefore, to Lemkin, he did not put what we now call the Holodomor as the central point. It was actually one of many important things that also had to be taken into account. Therefore, we need to look at the Soviet genocide policy as a much more complex, much more planned, much more systematic than just the destruction of several million people, because the victims are not just those who died and therefore did not contribute to the modern Ukraine. It's the entire population, most of which survived, but had to adopt to the Soviet cruelty, Soviet regime, internalize the policies, and became what they became. All right, therefore, the same with Surgun. Yes, I'm finishing. Last thing. So Surgun is, the deportation is not the only thing that matters. I just mentioned only thing that followed it. That was 3 waves of renaming the Crimean toponymy. It's sending them, the Crimeans, to Uzbekistan to forcefully assimilate them in the Muslim Turkic speaking populations. Sochi was important pinnacle of fait accompli of the genocide, but it's a long process. Therefore, we have to be careful what we label genocide, whether it is worthy of the name or it's something else. Okay, unfortunately, I have to finish. Thank you for your attention.
Fortunately, as it works out, we probably will not be able to have any questions. I do want to say this. I let it go. I've done about 150 of these conferences. I've learned something. There's a difference between political conferences,
where politicians talk for about 5-10 minutes, and really well put together academic conferences. And what I did, and I apologize for this mistake because the presentations today are absolutely classic. They are absolutely perfected academic exercises. And in fact, your enormous honesty, I would have, being a hard-bitten Ukrainian sort of nationalist, I would have been very angry at you saying the Ukrainians were doing, but that enormous honesty you just showed, Gennady, about what all of this has been about and what the Russians made all of us do. I let it go. I decided I'll let it go, and I'm not going to interrupt it. I want to say to all of you, I really am grateful that you all have done this, because you have seen some of the best performances you could possibly see on topics that most people don't know anything about. And what they've done is they've opened up an entire, all of these presentations are so absolutely classic. I know that we're going to put it on our website at the Center for U.S.-Ukrainian Relations, but these are absolutely classic. I just hope people have been watching this online, because it really is. And I want to compliment all of you. We have 2 more. Andriy, you may have to skip this and stuff like that. We have 2 more. One is the 3-minute, a 3-minute piece from Mr. Zakhaev, who happens to be the prime minister of the independent, what we see as independent Chechnya. And Miss Ayla Bakali, because she's been a real champion for us, and she knows that she's got a very short, and then we go and have a wonderful dinner together. Okay, so what I'm going to ask is, I'm going to thank all of them, and I'm just going to ask Andriy to put on the Chechen remarks. All of you guys, I thank you very much. No, we didn't.
Thank you.
Captain, thank you very much. And yes, you did a good job.
Hello, everybody. Dear colleagues, dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me and giving opportunity to speak on behalf of Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. We gathered at a particular moment. Russia's war against Ukraine has entered its 4th year. This war is not only a trial for the Ukrainian people, it is also a mirror for all of us who for decades have faced Moscow's imperial policy. For Chechens, Crimean Tatars, Circassians, and Ukraine's history speaks in unison. We know what deportation means. We know what the loss of statehood means. We know what repression and genocide mean. We understand the price of freedom all too well, because each of our nation has paid it with the lives of its sons and daughters. From the first day of the full-scale invasion, we understood clearly this is not only Ukraine's battle. It is a common struggle of all the peoples whom Russia has tried to subjugate. This is why Chechens began forming armed units on Ukrainian soil. Here in Ukraine, the Chechen army has been reborn. For us, it is a profound honor to be a part of the anti-Russian coalition and to contribute to the cause of international security. Today, one thing is evident. As long as Russia remains an empire, we have no future, neither in Chechnya, nor in Crimea, nor in the Caucasus, nor in the Ukraine itself. An empire will always attempt to seize our freedom, our land, and our culture. But we are, if we may use the word, deliberately destined to stand together. Not destined to suffer, but destined to survive together, to fight together, and to prevail together. There is no separate fronts in this war. Ukraine's fate is the fate of the North Caucasus. The fate of the Crimean Tatars is the fate of the Chechens and Circassians, and vice versa. This conference is further proof that what binds us is not merely political cooperation, but a shared historical destiny. We are joined by the memory of our victims, by the pain of our losses, and by a common hope that our children will live in free countries without fear and without dictatorship. I believe that this solidarity, a new strategy of freedom is being born for Ukraine, for Caucasus, and for all nations whom Russia seeks to deny a future. May today's gathering be a step toward that victory, the victory of truth over falsehood, freedom over oppression, and life over a death. Thank you for your attention.
And as I have asked one of our sponsors, and in this process to open, I'm asking Miss Ayla to please close from community of the Crimean Tatars, if you can hear. Yeah.
Well, what a day it was. You're right, Walter. It was quite informative. I think what we can surmise, one thing that's applicable for Crimean Tatars, for Ukrainians, and for Circassians is Russia has been the same nemesis. For Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, Circassians, genocide, check. Deportation, check. Repression, check. Persecution, check. And however, given this tremendous tragedy that our grandparents, our parents are living, nonetheless, the speakers in this room and the attendees in this room are a testimony that neither the Imperial, Soviet, or the Russian Republic have not succeeded. Earlier this week, myself and Andrei Dobryansky, we attended the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And during that high-level summit, President Zelensky opened the proceedings of the Crimean Platform. And this platform is a mechanism to reverse the 2014 annexation of Crimea. And it's also a international consultation and coordination format. And the outcome of this declaration, the outcome of this meeting at this time of the fifth summit was the New York Declaration. So, and basically it outlines, summarized that the Article 2 of the UN Charter that no territorial acquisition be made by force. But actually, what this the Crimean platform in essence does and did. The platform is actually an empowerment, so we can reverse the occupation. And we are here because we believe in our history. The title is quite clear for us. We lived our history. Our parents lived our history, and our grandparents lived our history. So we are, in a sense, history. And the Crimean platform also continually recounts and reminds everyone of our history, because in essence, we are who we are and we have a need to be. And so we have a need to speak to with our mother tongue. We need to belong to our communities. We need to feel empowered. And history is, in a way, of self-empowerment. You know, one of the most radical concepts for a tyrant, and that was also articulated by Steve Biko in the 1980s, was killed in South Africa because he talked about history as being self-empowerment. So our history is, in effect, our identity. Anyone who meets us, anyone meets a Crimean Tatar family, they are introduced to Crimean Tatar history, and same for Circassians. So I would like to conclude with one brief comment, and that is just to remind that it is the Russians who have deported the Crimean Tatars and not the Ukrainians. So it is Russian that has exiled Crimean Tatars and not Ukrainians. It is the Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians and Circassians who hold the same values of democratic values of freedom, participatory citizenry, respect for human rights, freedom of association. And these are very important values. So it is Ukraine who has identified, as was mentioned by all, that the deportation was genocidal. And as we speak today, while we don't have the exact figures, we can comfortably state that there are 500,000 Ukrainians who have died for freedom, for territorial integrity, and for the democratic values that we all talked about and espouse today. So on that, I'd like to say Slava Ukraini.
And the most eloquent member of the Ukrainian diaspora, I regret wasn't able to, he was kind enough to say that we should let everybody have the wonderful fruits of what we've done. Andrei Dobriansky, I want to personally thank you, Andrei, for all the work you've done. You've been a voice for the Ukrainian community in more ways than one. I think you spend more time on CNN than you do at home. So what I would want to do is just simply thank all of you for your patience. I know that this was a very long day, trying day, but I think we accomplished what we set out to do. And that is we understood not only the question of genocide, but we've understood that the question of genocide has a particular flavor when it comes to Russians, because it is also part of their long-standing colonial policy. I'm going to end it with this because, Genya, it really did hit me, but I realized that everyone who was part of the Russian colonies, at some point, every one nation that was part of those colonies had to serve, if nothing else, even in the Soviet armies, had to serve the Russians. And so, in effect, when you did that with the Zaporozhians, I'm sure that every one of us, when they were sent to another part of the Russian Empire, were serving the colonial purpose and probably engaging in what might be called genocidal policy. So with that, I think we learned an enormous amount. It was almost overwhelming. And there wasn't even enough room for questions. And this was a very smart, articulate audience that we assembled too. They were ready for the questions. And I humbly apologize. It was my mistake as a program coordinator. I should have let things breathe a little more. But with that, I invite you. There were supposed to be goodies out there, but the university didn't let us have it for the coffee break. Well, now you can have a series of goodies at the Circassian community has actually put this together. Please proceed to the cafeteria, and then we'll have seating for you. It's a meal for all of us. And those that were speakers, I would like them to stay back for a common speaker's picture. Okay? With that, I want to thank you. We have ended this conference, and perhaps not on time, but at least enough time to enjoy the aftermath. Okay, thank you.